comic book movies. The genre that took the world by storm and put culture in a stranglehold of geekdom over the last couple decades is facing its demise. There isn't any more proof needed than 2024, the worst year for comic book movies since the genre took off with Blade back in 1998. A fair question to ask is, how did it get here? Well, if this happened enough times, you'd stop being excited too. Comic book movies were the best thing going in Hollywood for so long it felt like the genre might endure forever. But with ballooning budgets, spiraling completely out of control, a fatigued audience, and product that is generally a displeasing mess at best and absolute dog shit at worst, there hasn't been a lot of reasons to think it'll last much longer. The demise of the genre has been predicted by many for a long time now, but after the abysmal failure of 24, it truly feels like it's on its final legs. Just 5 years ago, superhero movies in particular were, to quote Christopher Walken, the cock of the walk, baby. They went from fringe freak show movies actors were embarrassed to be in, like Howard the Duck, to taking over movie theaters and booting out any low-budget fare to make space for fucking Ant-Man. Every actor was pleading with their agent to get into the MCU, and if they couldn't do that, the DCEU. Lol. Like all movies, the genre skipped all of 2020, but once it returned, the cracks immediately began to show. The genre consisted of dozens of separate franchises, from Spider-Man to Batman, Captain America, indie comic films, you name it. But unlike other genres, once the bigger movies started to flounder in creativity and quality, it started to impact every other movie regardless of IP. No longer would people see movies as separate from each other. Audiences have been conditioned to look at comic book films as one cohesive universe, even if they're separated by companies. The Eternals, Doctor Strange 2, Thor Love and Thunder, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. God damn, I hate saying that title. These big budget movies with bigger box office expectations crashed and burned with critics and audiences. So by the time a beloved franchise like Guardians of the Galaxy released Volume 3, less and less people were showing up to see it. Guardians 3, a mixed bag but mostly received positively, opened to the lowest box office totals in the IP's history, and its quality helped it leg out to a decent figure. But the writing was on the wall. Later that year, the Marvels came crashing down to earth, becoming the first MCU movie to officially bomb and set a precedent of a changing tide. Marvel, the biggest comic book movie company in the world, knew it had to change course. But audiences are fatigued. They have been there, done that feeling, and the numbers pan out. That brings us to this year, the worst year in comic book movie history in nearly every given metric. Let's take a look at exactly how this year fell apart for comic movies. But first, lend me your ear, dear viewer, for a word on the sponsor of this video. If you're a regular here, you know I timestamp it all so you don't have to watch. But if you do, it's not just appreciated, I fucking love you. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. They're a team of gourmet chefs create each meal using only ingredients with integrity to help you feel your best all day long. Factor offers flavor-packed options each week to fit a variety of lifestyles, from keto to calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and protein plus. Prepared by chefs and approved by dietitians, each meal has all of the ingredients you need to feel satisfied while meeting your goals. It's perfect for someone like me, someone who just can't find the time to cook, or I don't want to. But I still want to eat well, and I get bored eating the same meal over and over just because it's quick. Factor makes it easy to eat fast and eat fresh every meal. They heat in just 2 minutes and savor the good stuff. Just completely take out the guesswork. Factor has so many meal options that whatever your goals are, they offer something that accommodates your needs, with over 35 meals and 30 plus add-on options that are updated weekly. I also use HelloFresh, the company that owns Factor, and I switch back and forth. You literally can't go wrong. Head to my link in the description and get 50% off your first order and free shipping on your first Factor box. And 20% off your next month of orders with code MOVIE50. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring this video, and now back to it. The first domino to fall for comic book movies this year was Madam Web. I've covered this movie pretty extensively, but you can't do a video like this without bringing up one of the worst movies of the year. Sporting an $80 million budget and nearly that much to market, it had a $300 million break-even point that it didn't even come close to reaching. The movie would ultimately be defended by Sony CEO Tony Vinciquerra, saying it was condemned by the media and therefore its box office potential was thwarted, because according to him, it wasn't a bad movie. I guess the people who actually saw it, like myself, who also put it in my top 5 worst movies of the year, couldn't trust our eyes or ears. It was the media who put us up to this. Fucking moron. Sony has its own problems, and that's something I'll discuss since another 2 Sony-verse comic book movies are on this list, but the trouble this year started here. Like its brother film Morbius, Madam Web became an instant meme, something everyone could make fun of. My local theater tried to get people to see it by advertising it as a lol cow, for God's sake. What this movie really did, though, was show the world that people were fed up with trash. It opened to an abysmal $15 million and concluded with just $100 million worldwide. Surely numbers that were fudged to make it look like it saved some face with a 9-figure total. total, but this was a far cry from the equally shitty Morbius that opened at just shy of 40 million 2 years prior, when audiences were still willing to give most comic book movies a chance. That's how quickly things have changed. Chronologically, Deadpool and Wolverine is next on the list, and it's also the lone comic book movie out of the half dozen released that had either critical or commercial success. Quite literally, this is the only one out of 6 movies that had a positive review score from both audiences, critics, and made any money at all. I called it in February, months before the movie released. It's a broadly appealing flick that drew a crowd because of nostalgia and memberberries, but it's no MCU savior. Want proof? Coming up next for Marvel is Captain America: Brave New World, which looks to be a disaster in the making, with nearly $500 million spent on it that's weighing it down. No matter how that movie turns out quality-wise, it's the least likely to turn a profit because of the immense amount of reshoots ballooning the budget. But Deadpool and Wolverine showed us one thing: nostalgia sells. Cameo after cameo, what that movie revealed is people don't care so much about risk-taking comic book movies anymore, but they certainly love the safest bet. And what is a safer bet than bringing back Hugh Jackman as Wolverine and pairing him with Deadpool? While researching this video, I came across an article by comicbook.com that couldn't be more of a joke. They suggested this movie was a sign that Marvel is willing to take risks. I burst out laughing reading that article. That site is such a rag. This movie was a guaranteed license to print money as long as they played it as safe as possible, sticking to what made Deadpool popular in the first place and slapping a yellow and blue clad adamantium man into the picture guaranteed it would be a hit. It's an outlier because of nostalgia, the safest bet of them all. Next, Lionsgate, which has become the shitty studio that couldn't. That's a good one. Released multiple worst movie of the year candidates, but the comic book adaptation / movie reimagining of The Crow claims top prize. Originally projected to be a sleeper hit like the first John Wick and even advertised as the gothic equivalent of that movie, it bombed off the face of the earth once reviews were out, revealing that yes, this is one of the worst movies to plague multiplexes during the summer. Essentially the polar opposite of Deadpool and Wolverine, this comic book movie did everything wrong. It's an update to the original 1990s classic, so it had plenty of nostalgia it could tap into if they had wanted to make a buck. But they modernized the bejesus out of this one, not understanding the difference between gothic and emo and becoming a cringe nightmare to challenge Madame Web. If only the box office total could match how big of a joke this movie is. It was one of the biggest bombs of the year, making just $9 million domestic. No, that is not an error. 9 million. And just 24 million worldwide, meaning it made only a quarter of what Madame Web made. To quote the next franchise we're going to talk about,
get what you fucking deserve!
Yes, up next is Joker 2. Holy God. Unlike the safe bet of Deadpool and Wolverine, this movie at least swung for the fences. It just missed and smashed itself in its cinematic face. Writer and director Todd Phillips made the biggest mistake of his career by switching it up and turning the sequel to his 2019 smash hit Joker into a musical. It's quite possibly the worst decision any studio has ever greenlit. Besides trying to turn Marvel into a girl brand, it killed a surefire win, demolishing any hope this movie would be good. But what might be shocking is that it's not the worst thing this movie had going for it. It's the script itself. Yes, that script contained the musical elements that teeter the line between horrific and boring, but it was the decision to regress Arthur Fleck's character in order to destroy him, and ultimately ruining what made the first movie so special. The film, like The Crow a month before it, got what it deserved too, taking what was once a billion-dollar movie franchise and making sure they will never make another one. The thought process must have been, even if the movie makes half of what the last one did, the studio would still turn a profit. So screw it. Go from a sub $70 million budget of the first film and balloon it to over $200 million before marketing costs. The movie went on to become one of the biggest disappointments in film history, getting massacred by fans and critics alike, and taking in just $58 million at the domestic box office, and barely breaking $200 worldwide, losing the studio hundreds of millions of dollars in what became a glorious rebuke of trash. The next movie on the list was Venom 3, coming out just a few weeks after Joker 2. By God, reading that out loud, I have to ask, do we ever hear anything other than sequels and remakes? I digress. Venom 3 fared better than most, getting worse reviews than its predecessor, which itself sat at a miserable 58% disapproval. But for whatever reason, audiences seem to keep forgiving these movies despite being schlock. Not quite enough, though, as it made the least out of all 3 Venom movies, topping out at just under $500 million. To its credit, the studio made this one on a $110 million budget, meaning it actually made some money at the box office. But as of now, Sony decided to stop pushing their luck and have no plans for more Venom movies in the foreseeable future. What came next, though, has effectively killed the Sony Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse. Kraven the Hunter. The reaction, or non-reaction I should say, to Kraven the Hunter is the result of too much audience abuse. Moviegoers were tired of every film in this universe being poor, like Venom, or excruciating, like Madam Web. And the film debuted at just $11 million domestically and holding a hilarious 16% Rotten Tomatoes score at the time of this writing. This is the film that set Sony CEO Tony Vinciquerra on that laughingstock PR tour, defending this as a media-generated hate crime against his movies that aren't bad movies. He went with, "It's not the movies that are awful, it's the audience and critics who are wrong." He became the Seymour Skinner meme. It's an excellent strategy if you're trying to never pull your head out of your ass. The fact that critics couldn't even come up with excuses for why these movies aren't mostly dog shit is shocking. Paid shill is thrown around pretty liberally, but it's hard to understand how a review aggregator like Rotten Tomatoes always seems to skew positive on movies audiences generally hated. A rating of 6 out of 10 holds the same weight on that site as a 10 out of 10. With that in mind, using Rotten Tomatoes as a barometer is usually a bad idea, with the site often being misleading and generally unhelpful. But it's a shocking turn of events that almost every movie on this list had critics and audiences aligned. Madam Web, 11%. Kraven, 16%. Joker 2, 32%. The Crow, 22%. And Venom 3, the highest of the low at 41%. Ouch. Good movies can fly under the radar, but by and large, films get what they earn. And good films have word of mouth that extend their time at the theater and fill the box office coffers. The Guardians 3 situation is a good example. It opened small by the MCU standards of the time, but lagged out and ended its run nearing the totals of its predecessors because audiences enjoyed it. Deadpool and Wolverine was an audience pleaser, and it too was a hit. But the other nearly half-dozen comic-based films this year bombed or barely made profit because they just were not good movies, no matter what a CEO lies about. Remember when superhero movies had stakes? I can't either. This year, it's like studios thought they could slap a costume on anyone, toss in half-baked emotional trauma, and bam, we have character depth. Madam Web is like someone replaced Spider-Man in a Spider-Man movie with tarot cards and psychic bullshit no one asked for. That'll sell tickets, for sure. And how did we get here? Multiple factors, but first, oversaturation. There's so many of these fucking movies. It's not a genre, it's an infestation. This year, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting some shitty comic book adaptation. Sequels, prequels, reboots, spin-offs, and some characters people didn't even know existed. Of course, Sony thought we needed a movie about Spider-Man's psychic babysitter, or WB with their Joker musical. It's like studios are stuck in a never-ending pissing contest, trying to churn out as many of these things as possible. Quality be damned. It's like 2024 was the apocalypse for the genre, with audiences getting a tidal wave of mediocrity, of nothing feeling special anymore, everything just blending together into a monotonous blur of half-baked scripts, leaving us drowning in CGI sludge and overplayed origin stories. Although, I suppose people would have to see these movies for that to happen, because audiences aren't showing up anymore, for good reason. You know when you eat too much of the same food and eventually the thought of it makes you want to Paul Rudd? That is superhero fatigue. It's real. Predicted a decade ago, it might not have applied then, but it certainly does now. After nearly 2 decades of Marvel and DC shoving capes and quips down our throats, people are finally done. The event film isn't the superhero movie anymore, at least not without the parameters of nostalgia. There's only so many times you can watch the same recycled plot of hero learns to believe in themselves and punches the big bad in the balls before you start actively rooting for the villain. Audiences simply don't have the same energy for this shit anymore. Most people aren't going to sit and try to care about Kraven the Hunter's inner turmoil when it's this sloppy and we could have just rewatched The Dark Knight. Audiences will eventually fatigue of nostalgia too. It's why I called Deadpool and Wolverine, fun as it is, a movie made by the press of a panic button. Bringing Hugh Jackman back, it equals money. Same goes for Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom. It's stunt casting, something the studio hopes will hold us over, buying some time while they try and cook up what they hope is 10 more years of superhero movies. My guess? Unlikely. Nostalgia does not equal effort. It does not equal quality product. It can be fun, and Deadpool 3 proved that along with Spider-Man No Way Home, and even the excitement of everyone coming back again for Avengers 5 and 6. But after that, what? They have to cook up something good to keep people going, because RDJ isn't playing Tony Stark again after this. But he will be Tony Stark in Avengers 5 and 6. Just watch. Yes, he's going to play 2 roles. I guarantee it. Write it down. I called it. Nostalgia is the lazy filmmaker's best friend. Instead of creating something new or interesting, 2024's superhero movies leaned hard on callbacks and fan service. Remember that Crow remake I've been shitting on? Of course you don't, because no one saw it, but you wouldn't remember it even if you did, because it just just reminds you of a better movie, the original from the 90s. Audiences can tell when they're being pandered to, so they'll take what they like and leave the rest. This year wasn't just a bad year for superhero movies, it was the year audiences collectively said enough is enough. Marvel has their nostalgia plan that will buy them a few more movies, but 2025 is going to be an interesting year. A lot is riding on two films, Fantastic Four and Superman Legacy. These two movies will most likely determine the future of Marvel and DC in some major ways, and how those studios go, so goes the entire superhero movie genre. James Gunn has already started to worry folks with his Superman Legacy trailer. There are a lot of characters in there, and it feels oddly like Zack Snyder's melancholy Superman rather than one of hope. But time will tell. If Superman falls, what will happen to the new DC Extended Universe? As of now, the genre has become a bloated, uninspired mess, and unless studios actually start trying again, superhero movies will go the way of the Western, an overdone relic of a bygone era. I love this genre, it's why I started this channel, but if they keep making them like this, honestly, good riddance. GG's.
Get what you fucking deserve!